My name is Karen Mobilia, and I'm a volunteer for the 26th Annual Organic Growers School Spring Conference. It takes place this March 8th through 10th at Mars Hill University in Mars Hill, North Carolina. And today I'm going to be speaking with Marissa Percoco. She's an instructor for homesteading and is an avid fermentation enthusiast who has spent the last 10 years exploring community and the wilds, as well as living deeply with various fermented cultures and local plants, and learning how it all comes together. She'll be teaching half-day workshops on both Saturday, March 9th, and Sunday, March 10th, on vegetable fermentation. So without any further ado, let's begin. Marissa, you are a self-proclaimed avid, sometimes obsessed, sometimes nomadic, and always a wild fermenter and culture shifter. Have you always been this way, or was there a pivotal moment in your life that turned you in this direction?
Into weird things and strange ideas and a novel person, but the fermenting started for me in 2008 when I decided to leave my normal life as a well, it wasn't normal to a lot of people even then, but to me it was very normal. I had a suburban homestead and, the number of kids and the square footage house and the mortgage payment and the husband. And, from the outside it all looked very tidy and fun, but on the inside it just wasn't really working out for me. And so I decided to do something really crazy, and looking back it was really crazy, but I decided to leave my home and leave my husband and take my kids and my goats and my chickens, and I just moved into the forest. And it was very impulsive, and I'm looking back, I can't believe I did that, but it was the best thing that ever happened to me. And we started homesteading, and this was in Tennessee, and very soon I met a group of radical fairies from Short Mountain Sanctuary, who at that time was led by Sandor Katz, and he was just this wonderfully merry man who came through and helped me figure out a lot of ways that I could keep the gallons of goat milk that I was producing every day without a refrigerator. And that was really what started the road to fermenting for me. Was necessity. I had goats and milk and little kids, but I didn't have a refrigerator. And so I started with kefir, which is a wonderful culture, and that just really quickly spiraled into the obsessive quality of fermentation for me, where I was making mead, and I was making sourdough, and I was making cheese, and I was making kefir, and I was making water kefir, and just every culture I could get my hands on, I was just obsessed with it. I couldn't get enough of it. So that's how it really jump-started, was when I met Sandor and became friends with him, and he would come to the community I was a part of and teach regularly, and kind of where he started teaching before he got famous. And that's how it all began.
That's amazing. I see that you're looking back on it and had a moment of wow for yourself and about doing it, because I cannot relate to you just yet, but except for the fact that I come from a large urban city, and I just moved to the mountains of North Carolina to be closer to nature. And I've only been here a year. I'm living in an apartment. I don't have a lot of growing space. I volunteer at farms and farm-type events to get my hands dirty, so to speak.
Well, that's how I started too, was living in the city and volunteering at urban farms.
Okay, so then I'm probably
I also come from the Bay Area in California. I grew up in a concrete jungle. There weren't many trees, and no one grew vegetables.
Well, one of the things that I think is kind of interesting is I happened upon a fermentation festival one weekend, and I went and listened to a lady talk about fermenting, and I bought some vegetables and I bought some equipment, and I came home and I tried it out, and I found out that it really wasn't that difficult. I had a successful first batch. I've had some failures since then, but I wanted to know what your thoughts are, what you think is the best way for someone to start fermenting as a beginner.
That's a good question, and I think that sauerkraut is just pretty hard to mess up. Not that, people will, and don't feel bad. Everybody messes up. But, if you just follow a few basic guidelines, sauerkraut can be so simple and so gratifying, just to that moment when every first fermenter peels their weight back for the first time and glimpses a strange pale grayish cabbage, and you think, oh gosh, it's going to be horrible, and then you get down in there and you taste it and it's magnificent. And I think it's just so empowering for humans to participate with this very old tradition. It's in our lineage for thousands of years that we've been for all cultures around the world. There isn't one culture that Sandor, my teacher, has studied that doesn't have some trace of fermentation in it. Even the Maori of Australia, there's a tree there that they know if they let the nuts of it ferment in water, it makes a very, fun drink that makes them lively and silly. Just everywhere on the planet, we have a history of fermentation. There's a bakery at the base of the pyramids in Giza that was not so long ago found. It's 2,500 BC is the date that they're thinking that it's from, and it's people making sourdough bread, thousands of years before even modern culture. I mean, it's so deeply a part of us and part of our DNA that I think for humans to tap into it is part of our satisfaction. We need to have the connection to what our people have been doing for so long.
That's really interesting. I really like how much history you're bringing into this craft or this skill, because
I'm kind of a history nerd.
That's good. So you've been teaching all types of fermentation. You've been teaching how to ferment mead. You have to teach how to ferment milk. Obviously, you're going to be teaching fermenting vegetables at the upcoming spring conference. Is that a good place to start too? I know you mentioned kraut. I've done cabbage. I've turned it into sauerkraut. It was delicious.
Yeah.
What's the difference between that and vegetables? Is it more complicated?
Well, it's funny. When I was first trying to wrap my head around all this stuff, I asked my teacher, Sandor, okay, Sandy, what's the difference between sauerkraut and kimchi? And he laughed and he looked at me and he said, one is made by a German grandma and one is made by a Japanese grandma. And so he's always teaching with humor, and I try to, what I've learned most from my teacher is to take things lightly, to not take it too seriously, to just have fun with it. And so, vegetables, there's so many ways to ferment vegetables. And there's a few tricks. Carrots can be problematic for people because they get really slimy if your ratio is too high and you don't use enough salt. But for the most part, just learning, for me, watching the lights go on above people's heads as they get how simple it is. In the class at OGS, we'll be doing the 4 basic methods, which is a dry salting, which is the kraut method, and then there's a whole brine solution, and there's a kimchi method. Well, 4 different methods we'll go over, so that, upon emerging from this half-day workshop, hopefully everybody will be able to look at a vegetable and think of at least 2 or 3 things they could do with it to ferment it. And that's what I want to give people. When we grow food, I'm also a farmer, and we grow a lot of food, and there's just times that, we don't know what to do with it all. And you can can food and you can freeze food, but canning, it changes the texture and flavor of food and the nutrition value of it tremendously. It takes a lot away, whereas fermenting adds a lot to it. When you ferment a lot of vegetables, you break down things that maybe we don't want to consume, and you also free up various micronutrients and trace minerals and different things in food that our bodies can't get without fermentation. So when I think of that, that's just kind of magical to me, that through this little process that these microherds of bacteria do for us, we get healthier food, which gives us a healthier gut. It's all related. We have so many ailments of the gut right now in our modern culture, and people are taking pills to try to fix it and buying very expensive probiotics and all these very, very interesting things. But really what we need to do is eat whole food and eat more fermented food. And if you Google healing the gut, most of it has to do with eating fermented foods. So that to me is just very interesting, that as we see the rise of disease, we see a decline of fermented foods in our diets. And I think that there's a direct correlation.
Well, that brings me to my next question. You have 4 adorable kids. I saw pictures of them.
Yeah, thank you.
And they're out there in the wilderness. I think your son drinking from a stream. And so my question was it difficult for your children to eat fermented food? Did they have to acquire it? Or maybe you spared them from all the junk that's out there and they don't know what they're missing? How did it work?
Well, yeah, it's really funny. My oldest son was 8. He's 18 now. And so when we first left his cozy bedroom and our suburban house, he definitely struggled the most with it, and he still is the pickiest eater. And then my daughter was 2 years younger than him, and she took a fish to water with the whole lifestyle change, but she was always trying to live outside anyway. And then my youngest 2 are twins, and they were only 2, and so they don't really remember any other way. So for them, that was been very easy, and they're the most adventurous of all of the kids, eating-wise, too. So I think that as far as parenting and trying to raise your kids in this way, the sooner you can start giving them strange-tasting foods, the better.
Good advice.
And, give them the sour taste, the lactic acid, and give them I'm not a big fan of kombucha. I don't like to say that out loud because it's such a big product in our culture right now, but it has a ton of sugar in it. So give them, whatever other fermented beverages. Kvases are great. I have a culture called Jun, which is a relative of kombucha, but it feeds on honey instead of sugar, and I think it's far more nutritious. So yeah, I think as far as getting kids to be adventurous eaters, the more the merrier. I think when you make a plate of food for a child, just always putting something fermented on it, even if it's just in the corner, even if they just pick at it, even if they don't really know what they think of it. Healthy taste buds are built over a lifetime, and I think all of us, like modern adults, are even more challenging to get to eat than kids are. If I make purple kraut and call it fairy food, the kids line up to eat it. But if I try to get your average grown middle-class American to eat the same thing, they're just going to be like, wait a minute, what? So it's harder to get my dad to eat something I make than a kid.
I believe you. I do take, when I make my fermented, I have beets right now in the refrigerator. I just eat 3 or 4 bites of it in the morning and 3 or 4 bites of it in the evening. I don't actually make a meal out of it, so people can get benefits from just snacking on it throughout the day.
Absolutely. I mean, one of the problems I see in our Western mindset is the idea that if a little is good, then more is better. And the issue with that, I think, with fermented foods is there's a lot of salt in it. That's how we get the magic to happen. And so these foods historically were never meant to be a main portion. What you're doing is perfect. They're meant to be a garnish and a little condiment. That's what I try to get people to understand. You wouldn't sit down with like a steak and a bowl of sauerkraut. Like that's just not what our bodies really need. And there's a whole conversation right now about prebiotics and probiotics, and it's kind of hard to understand without like a chemistry degree, but essentially, I tell folks the prebiotics are like the soil, and the probiotic is like a seed. And so if you're trying to plant your seeds in concrete, they're not going to grow. And so if you have an unhealthy gut with very little life in it, it's going to be harder for the probiotics to nourish and take up residence there. So we have to have in place what's called the prebiotics, which I like to use the metaphor of the garden. You would just the prebiotics are all the soil conditioners. They're the loamy soil and the compost and all the good stuff that we nourish the soil with before we ever even plant a seed. And our gut is the same way. We need to have a healthy gut that's nourished by prebiotics before the probiotics can take up residence. So right now you see so many people buying these little probiotic pills, and they're very expensive. And they're cultivated in the laboratory in a petri dish. And so we're taking this very delicate organism that has been used to sterile environment and sealed in a gel cap, and we eat it, and it hits the chaos of our gut. And most of the time, we're just making really high-grade poop that way. Those aren't taking up residence in our guts because our guts aren't the thriving, healthy environment that they need to be. So by taking in, like what you're doing, a few tablespoons a few times a day, you are taking in the prebiotics and the probiotics that have grown together in your kitchen with your yeast, and it's just really acclimated to your body and your environment. And so by doing that, you're nourishing your gut so much more than any little probiotic pill ever could. And I think that's the biggest point for me in teaching is, hey, y'all, this is a DIY thing. You know, you don't need to go buy anything expensive. You just need to buy a cabbage or, you know, a couple fruits or vegetables and ferment them and eat them. And all of a sudden, you're making medicine in your home and taking it into your body. And I think it's very empowering for people to realize that. Like, oh, I don't need a fancy vitamin. I just need to eat a little bit of this magical food, and I'll be better, you know?
Wow, what a concept. Food as medicine.
Right? Go figure.
The last thing I wanted to touch upon is where, if people wanted to, I mean, obviously you're going to be at the 26th Annual Organic Grower School Spring Conference, teaching this half-day workshop on both Saturday and Sunday, March 9th and 10th.
And I'm teaching mead classes, too. So we're doing the vegetables in the morning, and I'm also teaching mead classes in the afternoon on both days.
Oh, that's even,
because
that's
I'm just
fabulous.
as passionate about people making their own alcohol. You know, we live in Beer City where people spend a fortune on a glass of beer, and few people realize how easy and wonderful it is to make your own honey wine elixirs. So that's another really important concept to me is disengaging from the corporate alcohol model. And, you know, I'm just such a proponent of DIY culture and do it yourself. And there's nothing more satisfying than walking through the mountains of Appalachia, harvesting wild medicines, and going home and mixing them with local honey and creating this, like, beautiful, magical, medicinal beverage. So that's the other side of it. It's just so exciting.
I'm definitely going to be at that class, too. I'm going to take your vegetable ferments and the mead making class.
Great.
But if people can't get to this conference, how can they find you?
Well, it's funny. The last couple of years, I've moved and purchased a little piece of land in Barnardsville, and we're building a little house, and my partner and I are building an outdoor kitchen. So I'm really excited to be launching a series of classes and workshops at my own home, in my own laboratory.
Wow.
So that will be, you know, you looked at my website, and the last time I posted something was like 2 years ago because I've been really busy building the last 2 years.
That's okay.
But I need to very soon, and before you publish this podcast, I'm going to update my website, and I'm hoping to. I used to teach at my former home, and that was really satisfying because it's so much easier to bring people home than it is to haul all of my ferments to places.
That makes sense.
So I love having people out to my place. And just having, you know, I have workshops on grains and on dairy and on vegetables and on alcohol making, and it's so much fun. It just really brings my heart so much joy to get people's hands dirty and to show them how easy it is to make these. And then, you know, for weeks after any class that I teach, there'll be a series of emails with pictures of what people are making and what they're fermenting and their questions, and that's just really the best thing ever for me.
Well, you have a beautiful website. It's wilderlandia.org, and people can contact you there and sign up for a newsletter there as well. Is that correct?
Absolutely. That's totally correct.
They just need to wait a couple weeks for you to update it, and everything will be in place, correct?
Yeah. Yeah. You tell me when you're going to publish this, and I'll have it updated.
Okay. I'll let you know.
Sometimes I need a little pressure like that.
Well, it's been wonderful speaking with you. I am definitely going to be one of the people coming out to your home and taking lessons from you. I'm really looking forward to meeting you in March as well.
That's great.
And thank you so much for taking the time with me this morning to have this conversation, and I will obviously let you know when it's going to be published.
Great, Karen. Thanks so much for reaching out, and I'm excited to meet you. And I don't know if you have any questions about your own ferments. I'm happy to answer those. You said you had a few problems, you know.
Organic Grower School is the premier provider of practical and affordable organic education in the Southern Appalachians, building a vibrant food and farming community by boosting the success of organic home growers and farmers in the region. Their hands-on training, workshops, conferences, and partnerships inspire, educate, and support people to farm, garden, and live organically. You can find them at www.organicgrowerschool.org. Thanks for listening.